Good morning and welcome to the 21st meeting in 2025 of the Local Government Housing and Planning Committee. And I hope everyone had a great recess. And I remind all members and witnesses to ensure that their devices are on silent. And we have received apologies for this meeting from Fulton McGregor. And the first item on our agenda is to decide whether to take items 3, 4 and 5 in private. Are members agreed? Yes, we're all agreed. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is to take evidence as part of our scrutiny of the proposed National Good Food Nation plan from 2 panels of witnesses. And on our first panel this morning, we're joined in the room by Hugh Carr, who's the Director of Strategic Procurement and Commissioning, and Laura Muir, who is the Strategic Procurement Manager, both from Scotland XL. And also Nikki Joyner, who is the National Chair of Assist FM, and Andrew Kennedy, who's the Head of Facilities and Property Management at East Ayrshire Council. And we're also joined online by Phil Mackey, who's a consultant in public health prevention lead at Aberdeen City Health and Social Partnership. And he's here today representing Aberdeen City Council. So I warmly welcome everyone to the meeting. We've got around 60 minutes for this discussion, and I'm now going to open the questions. And I just want to remind members, if you can, I've told the panel in the room that we would let somebody know that we're going to direct the question initially to them. So if we can do that, that would be great. So I've actually got a general question for everybody. So you can all, and maybe I'll just start, Nikki, I'll come to you first on this. So I'd be interested to hear how your organisation will be impacted by the proposed Good Food Nation plan and how it will fit with existing plans and strategies that you already have in place.
Okay, thank you. So Assist FM represents all local authorities, Soft FM across Scotland, and the association is there to help shape and share good practice. And realistically, every authority works itself, but will be working in partnership, because when we learn of new innovative ideas across Scotland, we will then share that and see if we can adapt that strategy within individual authorities. Hopefully this will have a positive impact across Scotland and implementation of Good Food Nation, particularly when you have local authorities that are bordering multiple authorities bordering NHS, for instance, like Greater Glasgow Clyde NHS has 8 authorities. So that working together is essential to enable the plan to be delivered across Scotland.
Thanks. Andrew.
Thank you for inviting us here today. I think from an East Ayrshire Council point of view, I think from a collaboration perspective, I think both at a sort of local, regional and national level, there's opportunities. Within Ayrshire, we've got the community planning partnerships for each of the local authorities, and again, there's good engagement already around a number of themes that the Good Food Nation plan links into. We've got Ayrshire Economic Partnership and the Ayrshire Growth Deal, which again is very much linking and driving forward a food and drink agenda within Ayrshire. We do collaborate significantly with health through public health, environmental health services and food services across the 3 local authorities and with NHS. And I think there's also huge opportunities around community engagement, which again East Ayrshire in particular have done significant work around over the last 10 years or so. And again, we've got opportunities around our leisure trusts and also community organisations that are forming in the area, the likes of 9CC, which is 9 community councils that have come together on the back of community benefit funding from wind farms. And again, all of these organisations, I think, have got real opportunities to link into what the Good Food Nation plan aspires to. I think in terms of your second point, in terms of strategic plan, again, I think there's very much significant links around food and the Good Food Nation across poverty and inequality, jobs and skills, well-being, climate change and vibrant communities themes of our strategic plan. So for me, an area that I've been working in for a number of years. I think it does bring together a lot of those themes and very much links to the strategic aims of local government, as well as obviously links to Scottish Government.
Okay, thanks for that. It was a very positive response, actually, and I think we have heard in committee of the good work happening in the Ayrshire as a group and a collaboration there. And it sounds to me like, from your perspective, you've got a good basis to actually take this forward, which may not be the case for other local authorities, but it's great to hear that work. So, Laura and Hugh, I'm not sure who from Excel wants to come in on this question.
So I'll come in first,
Yep,
if you don't
great.
mind. So thank you for giving us the opportunity to come and talk today. I would echo much of what's been said from our colleagues. So given the role that we play as the Centre of Procurement Expertise for the local government sector, we focus heavily on working with our members. We're not a centre of technical expertise, we're a centre of procurement expertise, so we rely heavily on our member councils, of which all 32 are members, to provide the technical support. So for us, certainly the planned Good Food Nation agenda aligns well with our strategic priorities. We focus heavily on inclusion from a contract point of view. We encourage as much SME participation as we can. We are absolutely invested in growing local where we possibly can. We work hard with member councils around community wealth building, but at the same time we're realists. So ultimately we have to service 32 councils, difficult geographies, different priorities. So therefore we have to leave our economies of scale where it's possible. So for us the right approach is a hybrid approach between SME engagement and development, and certainly helping to develop local suppliers through some of our primary suppliers where it's appropriate to do so. But what we try to do is provide as much efficiency as we can to councils, but at the same time balance that with local economic development. And we are well aware of the correlation between healthy eating and healthy learning within our schools. And much of our food portfolio and the spend across our food portfolio is bought by councils for school meals. So we're heavily invested in all of that, and we welcome the opportunities that this agenda could certainly bring. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks. Laura, do you want to add anything more? Or no, that's good. Okay, so I'll go to Phil online.
Firstly, thank you very much. Firstly, can I check that you are hearing me?
Hearing you very well, thank you.
That's good. Thank you very much. I suspect a lot of what I'm going to say will echo points which have already been made by other panel members. From an Aberdeen City Council perspective, we recognise the centrality of good food and the supports which are necessary to ensuring good food is there not just for the health and well-being of individual people, but also for organisations, for the community as a whole, and for the region. So much of our welcome is recognising the way in which this legislation provides us with a basis for genuinely integrating good food into a much broader range of our activities. Perhaps if I can just highlight a few very quickly. One is, as you've already noted, I am involved with the Aberdeen City Health and Social Care Partnership, where we already have work going on in relation to promoting through food good health through healthy weight management and supporting obesity reduction. We're looking very closely at food insecurity and how we reduce food insecurity across a range of local geographic settings and within vulnerable communities. We are looking very clearly at supporting public procurement as a means of improving access to locally sourced nutritious food at an affordable price. And we're using that food system approach not only within our schools through educational programmes, but looking at the links across to sustainability, particularly in reducing carbon footprints associated with food and in the management of food waste. So within that context of public health, health services and social care, we believe there's very strong supports and integration there that's possible. But it does clearly go beyond that. We've got links across to developments around our social and economic well-being. Food is at the heart of our economic strategy regionally, as noted earlier by colleagues from Ayrshire. And that goes beyond our existing work just within the city, where, for example, we have a joint procurement strategy alongside colleagues in Aberdeenshire and Highland councils, which are being used to see dividends in these broad range of both economic and social well-being areas. I could go on for a long time on the linkages, but I suspect the real challenge is to ensure that the potential of the legislation is fully realised and that government supports councils in being able to maximise those opportunities and ensuring that the vision that underpins the legislation is put into reality.
Okay, thanks very much, Phil. I'm noting time already, and that was one question. So I'm going to invite us all, including myself, members and panel, to be as succinct as possible, although that was really all very important to hear. I'm just going to, I've got the next question, which is around timescales, but I also wanted to add in and kind of pick up on what Phil just kind of said there. And maybe, Phil, I'll start with you. So it's going to be a two-part question. So the Scottish Government published guidance in March that aim to help relevant authorities write their own Good Food Nation plans. I'd be interested to hear about your views on the timescales around having those plans approved by late 2027, given we've got local government elections. But also, we had in our call for views a number of organisations pointing out that while there's the resource to write the Good Food Nation plans, there's nothing specific about implementation. So I'd be interested to hear how concerned you are that the Good Food Nation plans will just become a desk-based exercise with little real-world impact. Now, I hear really great things from both Phil and Andrew that things are actually really already happening on the ground. So hopefully that's not going to be the case, but possibly it will be. So I'll start with Phil. And then if others can indicate if you want to come in, that would be great.
Thank you very much. Clarity around timescales and realistic clarity around timescales is always very helpful. I think I would probably highlight that it depends a little bit on what is expected. A timescale of 2027, given we're about to go into an election cycle, may not necessarily be as helpful as it might be in other periods of time. And also, if we're going to involve our communities and we're going to make sure that this is something which is co-produced within not just the city, but more broadly across the range of potential regional partners that I alluded to earlier, a 27 deadline may actually militate in favour of something which is slightly more desk-based in its creation than might be otherwise supported. I mean, we would certainly look to be much more able to be inclusive of stakeholders in creating good food plans and in thinking through who is appropriate for implementation and supporting that implementation. And time might actually militate against good integration in that way. In case of resources, always there is a resource issue for implementation. There seems to be a presumption that this can be done within our existing resource, which may well be true, provided that we're not double counting on those resources, that things which are already required of local government end up being presumed to be in place to deliver this alongside other areas.
Great, thanks very much. Anyone else want to come in on this? Andrew, and then Hugh, and then Nikki.
Again, probably sort of echoing Phil's comments there. I think the level of consultation and co-production is key to that timescale, and also probably the ambition of what the local plans might be. As you've said, I think Ayrshire have got some significantly good progress around some of the areas that are within the Good Food Nation plan, and therefore we may be just setting out what we're going to continue to do, but do we have ambition in other areas to go beyond what we're already doing? And again, that action planning, or is it a strategic or a strategy? So are you setting out the action plan for the next 5 years and being very detailed, or are you setting the strategic objectives? again, that would obviously take longer if it's more around the action planning.
Okay, that's a good point. Hugh.
Thank you. So my point's a very brief one, Convener, which is I think there's a real opportunity for Scotland Excel to support councils. We're an integral part of the sector. We're funded by all 32 councils. So therefore, I think this is a prime example where we can help to develop guidance at a national level and support member councils as they develop their own local plans. So I think work like this and strategic development activity like this is exactly in line with the objectives that were outlined when Scotland Excel was formed. So I think that we can support member councils to develop their local plans.
That's very, very positive. Nikki.
I think it's important to note that a lot of authorities have, as we know, Andrew in East Ayrshire have started working. Shetland are probably quite far ahead of the curve, but some local authorities haven't even started considering the Act. So everybody's starting from a different point, and that timescale will then vary across Scotland depending on which individual authority and where their starting point is. So that's kind of something that should be considered in timescales.
Okay, and do we have so you mentioned a couple like Shetland, do we have a kind of record of do we know where they're all at?
No, it's not been measured. I know, like for instance, I go Glasgow, have got their food plan in place, and I know because this sharing, Assist has written Good Food Nation, school foods, and we pulled upon good practice across Scotland so that we have an idea of where good practice is and where some projects are, but with the broader scale of things, there's not a national idea of where everyone's sitting.
Okay, not yet, but maybe that's something that will come to the fore based on what we're doing here today. Okay, I'm going to move on. I'm going to bring in questions from Willie Coffey.
Thanks very much, Convener, and good morning to everyone, and thanks for coming to the committee. I wanted to ask about, particularly to Andrew and Phil, about how the councils collaborate with the local health boards, for example, to share the vision within the Good Food Nation plans that we have. So I could maybe ask you, Andrew, to open up and let us know a wee bit about how we collaborate with the local health board and take this whole agenda forward.
Thanks. So I think, as I've already mentioned, I mean, clearly through Ayrshire, obviously from my experience, Community Planning Partnership Board very much is the sort of coordinating role around the strategic plans for each of the organisations, and there's significant work around maybe. So at the moment, the Good Food Nation plan isn't necessarily been a kind of high-level strategic kind of discussion point at those committees yet, but very much the food and how food links with each of the other areas, whether that's poverty and inequality, whether it's well-being, and obviously different bits about health and social care, and hospitals, etc., but also from an operational level as well. We're doing, as Nikki alluded to, we've already been doing work over the last kind of year, developing and coordinating, pulling together a lot of the work that's already happening that would support the Good Food Nation plan. We've got a group within the council that sort of picks up officers from each of the main service areas that are affected, including health and social care, and we've also had meetings with both the other Ayrshires and with the NHS. So I think there's that kind of, I suppose, administrative, organisational and governance arrangements, but also I think a lot of the work on the ground that's being done through services, through community groups, through public health, our leisure trust, are all trying to build food into the activities that are there. I mean, within East Ayrshire we've got 17 community larders, which again sort of link back into a number of supports, whether it's through health, whether it's through ourselves inside the food provision, or whether it's financial support that people are being provided with. So those mechanisms kind of on the ground are also there, as well as that wider kind of governance, and really trying to kind of link in and make sure food continues to be one of the key discussion points around all of those discussions.
Thanks, Andrew. Probably the same question to Phil. I mean, how does it work in Aberdeen? Do you have some good cooperation with your other councils round about you and the local health board? And you opened up your remarks talking a wee bit about that relationship. So could you just offer the committee a wee bit more of a glimpse into how that works for you up in Aberdeen?
Happy to. I think actually the first thing to note is I'm an NHS employed consultant in public health, and I am here representing Aberdeen City Council in presenting their evidence to the committee. I think that suggests a degree of comfort and a degree of integration which we find incredibly helpful and useful. We do make, as colleagues in East Ayrshire have noted, a really strong use of community planning and Community Planning Aberdeen as being a major vehicle. And as things currently stand, we are renewing our LOIP, our Local Outcome Improvement Plan, for a 2026 to 36 period. I apologise to the committee. I had thought I'd switched my telephone off. So if you can hear a phone noise, it's me in the background. That LOIP is clearly something which inherits work which is already going on, which has a direct relationship here. So things around, as I've already mentioned, social and economic well-being, work around climate and health and sustainability, and particularly there about food waste, where I lead many of the local initiatives around food waste and food waste management as part of the overall response within our community plan. I think fundamentally, the challenge here is not can we integrate, it's ensuring we have that opportunity to integrate to the best of the legislative vision, if I can put it that way. Having time to deliver on this being seen as equally important as other demands which are placed on the NHS and on local government is going to be key here. And at that point, I would just want to make a plug for the overarching population health framework which government has recently released, which affects both local government as well as the NHS, and that shift towards a preventative approach as being required and hopefully being made meaningful on this occasion.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Phil. I wanted to just ask another question to colleagues about the role that planning and licensing might play in all of this. I mean, I spent many years as a local councillor, and we used to get lots of issues about fast food outlets at or close or near to schools, and the number of school kids that go into the town centre to eat rather than eat at school and so on. We've made great progress, I know, about that, but is there still work to be done in that whole area, do we think? Maybe we could start with Andrew again. Is there work that we could do to improve that situation even more?
I think there are still aspects of public sector and from its wider sense that I think, as Phil would kind of highlighted, that there are aspects where food is much higher on the agenda than in other areas. And I think kind of clearly planning in its widest sense is an area that is still, I think, got opportunity there to kind of further strengthen some of those links, whether that's sort of around, and I think as we've seen with the national planning frameworks around climate change, starting to drive some of those things around land use, and in terms of opportunities for growing. There's also the sort of community place plans as well that I think are becoming more important in terms of the development within local communities. And again, I think those sort of are probably the mechanisms that I think would give greater opportunity for food to play a stronger part in some of those decision making or considerations around the kind of planning decision making process. Because it is still a difficult balance with, I think, with everything we're dealing with around this. There are it's weighing up the balance between different aspects of what's important. So is it job creation that's actually important in terms of investment, or is it environmental or food considerations? But I think there are certainly a couple of areas in there that I think, from a planning point of view, there's more opportunity where things could probably be strengthened.
Thanks, Andrew. Phil, Aberdeen, the experience there, is there anything you could add to this story about how we can pay more attention to planning and licensing powers that we have to improve the whole agenda?
Indeed. A couple of observations, if I may. One is we have just recently adopted policy which now requires health impact assessment to be an integral part in all local development planning applications. That's work which I was involved in alongside planning directorate within the council, within response to including greater health inputs under NPF4. That's something that will emerge over time, I think, as being a powerful way through. And on the licensing front, colleagues have already noted that challenge that there can be between balancing economic development versus health and social outcomes. I suspect this is an area which we need to learn to be perhaps a little more balanced in favour of good food and good food availability rather than economic demands. I'm very conscious of just how many applications for drive-through fast food restaurants that seem to be within a 10-minute walking distance of many of our secondary schools in the area. And that is something which very often is something which falls into the legal domain ultimately rather than necessarily the licensing domain.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Phil. Any comments on that particular issue from our other colleagues around the table? Nicola?
Sorry, I know for a fact in my authority we don't have food vans around schools. It's about young people's safety. However, I do know that there are other authorities that have tried to stop food vans and been challenged on it. So it's a mix across Scotland. So it doesn't align everywhere. So that's the problem. It's back to everybody starting at a different point.
Okay, thanks very much, everybody. Thank you. Thanks, Convener.
Thanks. Very briefly, Megan Gallagher.
Briefly, and on the point that we're just speaking about just now, do you think that's to do with perhaps the quality of food options that are available within schools at present? Do you think that that's something that needs to be looked into to try and prevent young people from utilising premises out with the school? And is that something that you're actively looking at in terms of, you know, trying to find ways and measures that don't influence children and young people to actually go out and use these premises outside?
I think often it's about young people leave school for multiple reasons, and assisted our research about beyond school gate and why young people are leaving, and quite often it's about the environment in the school. So if they don't have a nice eating environment within the school, then they've got no reason to stay. If they don't have enough seating to sit with their friends, they don't stay. If some young people just want to leave to get away out that environment. But the foods, all schools in Scotland, across Scotland, can deliver, and most do, I know they do, quality food that are in line with the school food standards. And it's just about getting the food that you deliver to align with what young people are looking for. And the research, if young people are going out to different outlets, you can mirror that within schools, but make it a healthier choice that is a better option for young people to take.
Okay. Thanks. I'm now going to bring in Alexander Stewart on procurement and the Good Food Nation plan.
Thank you very much, and good morning to the panel. I mean, procurement is vitally important in the process, and we've touched on the past about local suppliers and the farming community and ensuring that they have an opportunity. So what do local authorities and other bodies currently do to ensure that local food producers and suppliers can benefit from council procurement? And will the plan improve access to procurement opportunities for local food producers? And I know that East Ayrshire have done a lot of work on this in the past, and we're seen as maybe a pioneer of that. But there are some changes, I think, afoot, and it would be useful maybe for Andrew to give us a flavour of how you would see that, because, as I say, the local producer and the farming community have a massive role in ensuring that they can tap into that.
Yeah, so, I mean, East Ayrshire, for the best part of 20 years, have been sort of trying to deliver this agenda, not just from a kind of local supply aspect. It was very much driven by that three-pronged approach around how do we look at what we buy and how we put food on the table in schools, around health, environment and the economy. And that was very much the agenda that we've tried to deliver on. We've been Food for Life Gold accredited since 2008, and even with the current changes in our supplier base, we will still maintain that standard. So I think one of the approaches that we've had, and again, recognising that Ayrshire has that opportunity. We have a significant kind of food and drink sector, over 1,200 SMEs in the food and drink sector. So that that market, that competition, that opportunity is very much a focus of what we were aiming to do. I think over the last 20 years we have tendered every 3 to 4 years. We've a range of suppliers that have been consistent and worked with us for extended periods, and we've had other ones who have come in and left, and others have taken on that role. But the standards, the contract requirements and the process that we've went through has been fairly consistent. We've adapted it each time, recognising some of those opportunities and challenges that the sector of the market is having to try and kind of maintain the outcomes from the process. I think, as you've said already and alluded to, the first thing's about creating opportunity. And as I say, we've taken a different approach, a local approach. I think obviously colleagues will be able to talk about that kind of national framework contract and how even within that, and from my perspective, I think there's much closer alignment now to what we're doing and what's been done with the national contracts than when we started in 2008. But those challenges, I think now, and what we're seeing over probably the last couple of rounds of tendering that we've done, that the market shifted. There's probably more challenges from the contractors and the producers. We have a range, and we've always had a range of local producers, local distribution and businesses that were not necessarily sourcing everything from East Ayrshire. Clearly, we've previously had fish contracts, so clearly the fish doesn't come from East Ayrshire. We don't have a port. So there is aspects there where what is it we need to do to make sure we're still getting higher quality produce, we're still getting an impact in the local environment. So again, it's looking at the supply chain, looking at the standards that we put in. Again, from that health perspective, we have tried to drive and maintain the higher quality of food, making sure that it's fresh produce that we were cooking in schools every day. Things like, obviously, Quality Meat Scotland standards, free-range eggs, Red Tractor certified chicken. But over the last 20 years, those things have become more and more difficult in certain aspects, even to source from Scotland, never mind kind of within Ayrshire. So each of the lots in the areas that we've had have adapted and changed over that period of time. I think there's been a shift in the last couple of years, probably the two main things that, and again, this is just my opinion on it, that I think the challenges, if we look at obviously food inflation and the cost of business just now has been significant. The amount of investment or grant support that the public sector put into local businesses through COVID and cost of living has been significant. And even just keeping your business afloat just now is a real challenge, never mind considering complex procurement processes to look at future business. I mean, as an example, we've consistently had local suppliers, butchers, providing our meat contracts. This round of tenders, not a single one of them bid for it. So that's even a step beyond whether they're successful and whether they're even taking the opportunities that are still there. I think the second one is I think that a lot of the bigger suppliers, their market shares in hospitality, their market shares in kind of supermarkets and retail, and those markets have been significantly squeezed over the last few years as well. So I think there are a number of suppliers and bigger suppliers that have taken this tender opportunity that they've not done before. So I think the level of competition in the market for our tenders in particular has shifted, which means clearly we'll need to look at how the objectives that we've set around it need to flex and need to move as we go forward in terms of future options. I could go from an East Ayrshire point of view to Scotland Excel contracts and buy exactly the same produce that we are tendering for separately. But we've kept the aims of tendering separately to kind of maintain that opportunity.
Thank you. Anyone else want to add? Hugh, want to come in possibly?
Yes, thank you, if I may. I think it's a really interesting one, and it's a challenge that we face. I've been with Scotland Excel for 15 years, and it's a challenge that we face every year. So every time we open up a tender opportunity, we work hard across the country to try and get as much visibility of the opportunity that's coming up to local suppliers. We've ran roadshows across different council areas. We took some feedback which said that local butchers and local grocers, they're in their shop during the day if they're in the retail sector, so therefore it doesn't suit them if they hold an event through the day. So we've held events that run from 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock so that they can call in the way home. But there's been a real reluctance on the part of some small providers, particularly in the food sector, to apply for a place in a national framework. We've done a number of things to try to make it more attractive. We've been very, very clear that you don't get any extra scoring points if you can bid for 32 councils than you do if you can only bid for one. We've taken some council areas that have got a large geography, such as the Highland Council or Aberdeenshire or Argyll and Bute, and we've split it into different sub-lots in an attempt to make it more attractive, particularly for SMEs. And this remains a challenge. We have worked closely with other centres of expertise and including the Scottish Government. Everyone faces the same challenge, and it's about reluctance on SMEs in particular to engage. Your final part of your question was, will the plan improve access? I think anything that we can collectively do to raise the visibility and raise the profile, I think should improve access. But we need to continue to work with the sector to bust the myth that you need to be able to supply on a national basis in order to be successful on a national framework agreement. We work closely with member councils. I mentioned at the very start that we are driven by their needs and their demands. I think we can learn from each other on that front. Certainly the team will work closely with Andrew and his colleagues. So we believe that there maintains a high opportunity. And I think we could never say, well, we've done a good job there, we've ticked that box and we can move on. I think that every time a tender opportunity comes out, we have to work hard. And my final point would be that even if we work with national suppliers, I think it's incumbent on them and incumbent on the work that we do with them that we encourage them to source locally as well. So, for example, we've got a framework for fresh and cooked meats and fish. 77% of the products that are available on that are sourced in Scotland. I think there are some product lines on other contracts that we have that it would be impossible to maintain the same percentage coverage because there's just not the supply opportunities. So I think that finally we shouldn't give up because it's a national challenge, but I think that we've got to keep being innovative, keep working with our suppliers to work with their supply chains to grow them accordingly. Thank you.
And you know, Highland Council talked about what they were asking for, a clearer practical guidance from the Scottish Government when it came to embedding the Good Food Nation principles without losing any of or breaching any of the existing regulations. So does the Good Food Nation plan provide clarity and what councils can and cannot do in terms of procurement? Do you think that that is going to happen?
On, please, and then I'd like to invite Laura, if you don't mind. I believe so. I think that fundamentally, if we start in a position of clarity, then the rest becomes a bit more straightforward. I think often public procurement has seemed to be a barrier. I think we'll have to change, and try to bust that myth as well. I think we'll have to see it as an enabler. And I think we're very, very good at collectively having a bit of joined-up thinking. I think this would be a positive step forward if we have national guidance. And as I said earlier, I think that we can work with councils in order to help their implementation. If you don't mind, could I invite Laura to answer specifically on the guidance?
Yeah, thanks. So, obviously, any additional guidance would be welcomed, but we do have guidance in place, such as the catering for Hungry for Success and Catering for Change documents, which both documents have helped in the past to give a clear pathway for local sourcing. Within the current regulations, we have been able to push the boundaries by writing our specifications in certain ways, such as in our fresh meats, we ask for PGI products, the Protected Geographical Indicator, to ensure we get Scottish beef and lamb products. So I think it's about us working together with our communities to ensure they realise that the opportunities they do have within the regulations. Thank you.
Thank you. And Andrew?
Maybe just come back to the Catering for Change document that it was produced in 2011, and also even with the Hungry for Success and also Better Eating, Better Learning documents, which I was involved in the development of at the time. I think we are in a different place. I think both in terms of obviously procurement legislation, the market, but also some of that wider policy piece, which clearly Good Food Nation talks about. So I think some of that guidance within Catering for Change could either be absorbed into the Good Food Nation plan as an approach, or the document being updated to reflect kind of maybe some further best practice that's been available and developed over that period of time.
Thank you, Convener.
Thanks, Alexander. Did you want to come in on anything?
Just on the procurement, wider procurement issue, do you think there needs to be any further changes to procurement legislation to allow local producers, smaller producers, a level playing field when they're bidding for work? Because we often hear that the bigger bidders, bigger companies can always undercut local suppliers. So is the procurement legislation itself correct, appropriate, fit for purpose, or do we need to revisit and relook at it? Do you think? Hugh?
Thank you. I think it's a good question, and I think there's enough flexibility within the regulations as they are that we shouldn't start with the regulations. I think that we should start with how we market opportunities, how we make some of the procurement processes simpler. The regulations, I think, in some cases are more advanced than where they are, in other parts of Europe. But I think what we have to do is we take the feedback back from suppliers. Sometimes, by the nature of what we do, they can look at a procurement, a tender document, and it looks very, very onerous, and it's very, very difficult to complete. We've tried to simplify it. We'll take as much feedback as we can to simplify the process that we use. So for me, I think that there's work that needs to be done on the process, but I think that we can operate effectively within the regulations as they currently stand, because I think that they are certainly fit for purpose, and I think that they have been progressive enough based on the work that's been done here in Scotland over the course of the last 10 years. So I think that we need to start with how we simplify the process rather than the regulations themselves, to be quite honest.
Anything from council colleagues? Andrew?
Andrew, and then actually Phil indicated he wanted to come in on the previous question, so we'll go for Andrew and then Phil.
Okay. I suppose the two things for me, and when you look at it from a council perspective, is that first element around economic growth, business support services within councils, and from my experience, there's significant work there, and significant opportunity for local businesses to be supported for any business growth opportunity. So it may not just be public contracts, it may be developing opportunities around marketing and production to support work they want to do at a farmer's market, or it might be to look at how they tender for other contracts, like of access to supermarkets and things like that. And a number of the suppliers that we've worked with over the years have taken those other opportunities as opposed to going down with the public procurement side of it. So I think there's a context there, which is the wider economic growth of these businesses and their business strategies around it. I think the other bit then is are our tenders and are our supply requirements aligned with those business strategies? I mean, clearly, from Nicky's perspective and my perspective, it's school food mainly that we obviously are buying, and that's the significant volumes. We've seen a huge increase in fruit and vegetable purchases because of the changes in the nutritional regulations. So again, we've went from probably £100,000 a year to £300,000 a year spend on that. So when you're looking at development of that business, that's something that they're keen to take. Unfortunately, other produce, we're not making as many cakes. So eggs have reduced. So again, does that fit with the business plan of that organisation in terms of the scale? we don't provide meals in the summer when clearly a lot of local produce is produced. So again, does that fit with the strategy? So I think you have to look at both sides in terms of that procurement. And again, it is a competitive market. The bigger companies will adapt as well to whatever you put out in your tenders, whatever you kind of work within your frameworks. So I think when you've still got a procurement process and a level of competition, there will always still be challenges.
Phil, Aberdeen, can local suppliers, smaller suppliers still compete, do you think, up in Aberdeenshire?
To an extent, I would agree. But I think it really depends on what balance we're seeking overall in the nature of guidance. The point I was wanting to make was we can't underestimate the way in which national frameworks do affect procurement. But how we change that is going to depend on whether or not we see economic requirement as being the driving force behind the framework, or whether we see the core benefits that being an anchor institution is about. Are we seeing health? Are we seeing community integration and development? Are we seeing small business rather than larger scale business as being the driving force here? So the point I wanted to make was very simply, we are very often being expected to reconcile differing requirements where core benefits are accepted and being sought, but the degree to which the balance is in favour of one area of our power and influence rather than others. As a public health consultant, I'm always going to look for the way in which, for example, community empowerment is really supporting local food growing strategies. But if they're only geared towards people who can make use of them for their own consumption, that's going to be much more limited than using that as a vehicle to lift into local schools provision, helping and supporting young people see the source of their food, and therefore wanting to stay within schools for school meals because that's being procured as part of what might be necessary local flexibilities within the context of national guidance.
Okay, thanks, Willie. All right. So I've just got to remind us again about time. We're 10 minutes before we're planning to end, and we have 5 more questions to ask you. So, colleagues, if you could direct your questions to people specifically, and then if there's something that you feel hasn't been said and you want to get that on the record, then please do indicate and come on in. So I'm going to bring Mark in.
Thanks, Camilla. Good morning. A question for Hugh or Laura first. Scotland Excel have said, and I'm quoting, saying that delivering on the ambitions of a Good Food Nation plan will require investment in procurement skills, tools and market engagement across all levels of local government. And at the same time, other submissions are talking about the lack of funding and capacity in local government. So I just wanted to ask, are you seeing any evidence of the investment that you are saying is required, or is there a risk that the ambitions of the Good Food Nation bill aren't realised at all?
Yeah, I think from our procurement perspective, we rely on the local authorities to help us develop the technical aspects of our tenders. And what we're seeing is that there is not the resource within the authorities to be able to share the information that we need to develop our tenders. So that's one of our concerns around Good Food Nation, is that we won't be able to tap into the knowledge of our authorities to develop what we need to support the Good Food Nation ambitions. Hugh, do you have anything you want to add?
I think that, thank you. I think that that's a valid point, and we're seeing that pretty much across the board, not necessarily within this particular area. And I think that that probably ties into some of the feedback that you've received in other submissions when they talk about, funding. So there's a correlation between resources available within local authorities and the funding that comes with that. But for us, one of the things that we've tried to do through our academy is we've tried to develop a number of new and innovative ways that we can deliver procurement vocational training. We've worked both with the registered bodies as well as through the SQA and Scottish Government to develop those programmes. So we're looking to enhance the skills that we have within the sector, but in some cases there's just gaps within individual authorities which impacts us.
Okay, thanks. Andrew, Phil or Nicola, any comments on whether local authorities actually have the funding or capacity to deliver on the Good Food Nation plan?
I think probably two aspects, I suppose, a more positive and a more negative approach is our perspective, because I think clearly all local authority, all public sector is struggling just in terms of the extent of the budget pressures and also the range of priorities. So again, it's about how far up the priority list that this one can be. I do think there are opportunities, though, in terms of what organisations do in terms of collaboration, and I think as Hugh's indicated, that role that Scotland Excel can play at a national level and provide some of that advice and support. Clearly from a local level we still have significant experience around procurement with food, but as those people leave the organisation, other procurement people might come in that have got a slightly different background, and therefore that again could potentially change where we're able to kind of develop things on our own, or we would be looking for more collaboration. But I think the leading opportunity is probably more around kind of finding ways of collaborating better.
From assist perspectives and other authorities, I know from myself, I've been in many technical panels with Laura, but I'm now picking and choosing which ones I've got time to contribute to. And I know other authorities are finding that a struggle as well. So that's probably not helping the whole procurement process. From a local authority perspective, yeah, the resource required to deliver this is going to be a challenge, because the pulling together different areas within authorities, pulling people out silos so we can all start working together is going to be a piece of work that authorities need to somehow find the time to be able to deliver on. And I think the whole consultation piece is going to be time consuming as well. So we don't want the plan to be a paper exercise. We want it to be value, and we want it to be beneficial to every authority across Scotland. And I think that resource, but sharing good practice across different authorities and learning from each other is always helpful. And I think that's something that we're doing and we've started to do well.
Okay, my second question was on community growing. Now, in 2022, we as a committee did an investigation and produced a report and conclusions that said one of the biggest difficulty, an enormous barrier to community food growing was access to land. And I just wonder what you think of the aspirations in the Good Food Nation plan, if any of that overcomes the barrier of access to land. Andrew first. Yeah.
I suppose not necessarily my area of expertise specifically, but I think from an East Ayrshire Council point of view, I think the Community Empowerment Act, which is obviously referred to even in your own considerations, is probably been a shift there. And the amount of community organisations, particularly through sort of areas around climate change, health and well-being, and the wider benefits of community growing around those kind of aspects, where certainly from an East Ayrshire point of view, local organisations have now developed around some of that, how community growing supports well-being, how it can support skills, how it can support the environment. They've been able to access more grants, and then that's allowed them to start to develop those opportunities. We've got 2 or 3 really good examples within East Ayrshire where community growing has maybe not been originally focused on food, but that's what they're actually doing. So I think it's again maybe some of the points that Phil's already mentioned, it's that link to some of the wider policies, and making sure that people see food growing within communities as a multiple benefit to some other areas of the wider strategies in terms of health and well-being. I think that's where I think we're seeing some of that success. And it's a skill. It's hard to grow food. So I think kind of building that up and recognising that in itself is the experience of learning as well, I think is really important in how people look at it, rather than, as you said, it's very difficult for us to do something in a school to feed the whole school. But what they can understand is that's the food that they're growing, and they might have it one day, but actually this links to where you're actually getting your food from in terms of the wider supply chain. So I think it's just understanding the nuances, I think, within communities and how you can build food into it.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's certainly a really good point about, I think some of the work here we're talking about is that cultural shift around food. And if you actually learn how it's grown and what it takes to actually grow something that's not riddled with caterpillar holes, that's really an important understanding that it is very challenging. I'm going to bring in Megan Gallagher around measuring impact.
Thank you, Convener. And the two questions that I have, I'm going to try and condense them just given the time. So the plan accepts that there are issues with procurement data, and the plan also includes various high-level indicators relating to each outcome. So I guess my question is, condensing the two issues together, what extent is data available for these indicators and helping to track progress at a local level? And I'm just wondering if Hugh or Laura wants to pick up on this. Thank you.
First, so we've got lots of data. In fact, we're data rich, but potential information poor, because we collect from our suppliers and we align it with our councils what's been spent across our frameworks. We also measure it at a national level because the Scottish Government coordinate nationally collection of data on a procurement hub, so we can measure the level of leakage between what councils are spending across our frameworks and what they're spending elsewhere. Sometimes much more difficult to drill that into the next level. So where there's a choice between product A or product B, that may be much more difficult to define. But we've got lots of data, and I think it's how we convert that data into usable information that we can help to inform decisions on what the next generation of a contract's like, to be quite honest.
That's helpful. Laura, have you got anything further to add?
Yeah, so as part of all of our food tenders, we do collect information on country of origin, which helps us to support the local authorities by providing them data around where their core spend is sourced from. And we've been tracking that for about 8 years now, and that's went from around 28% when we started tracking up to 34% last year. So we are seeing increases year on year on the amount spent on local sourcing by local authorities.
Thank you. And I suppose from a local authority perspective, on the back of what Hugh is advised in relation to getting that information out, how can we better help local authorities with that, using that data appropriately, getting that information out to make sure that the indicators are being achieved? I don't know if Andrew, Nicola or Phil. Phil?
Do you want to come in? Yep.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Yes, I was going to raise the point about interpretation of indicators. So your question is very helpful. I think we do need to be thoughtful about what monitoring and evaluation frameworks we need. I think we need to recognise that these relate to some of the areas we've discussed today, but which aren't currently available. I do not know currently how we would monitor the impact of community food growing in terms of its land use, or in terms of the outputs from that into schools, even if it is just on a day a week, as Andrew has mentioned. I don't know what a just transition towards using food as a way of improving ethical food procurement is looking like at the moment, because we don't have the data. So I think there is work to be done, not perhaps in the short term, but over the lifetime of the aspiration of Good Food Nation, to get into that core benefit and start monitoring and evaluating the impacts for those core benefits. That brings me to my second point. Time is not something that's our friend here. If I want to see a population health benefit, I might have to wait 25 years to see that level of improvement in something like reducing diabetic type 2 diabetes rates amongst a large-scale population where I've used diet as a major focus for that improvement. So I think we need not only the monitoring and evaluation frameworks to be thought through, but when we might expect to see impacts which are meaningful rather than simply a logic that suggests it's changed.
Really important points, Convener.
Local authorities, we tend to analyse our purchases anyhow. Most local authorities in Scotland do an APSI return, and that's one of the questions I asked about what you procure locally. And so we pull that data annually from our management information we get. So we do have a sort of baseline of information that we can work from.
Thank you.
Maybe just a short point on it, 'cause I suppose it's just that wider issue of data. So I suppose if I look at food spend, and if that was one of the measures, and obviously in the last 3 years we've seen a 35% increase in inflation. We've introduced half-price school meals within secondary schools, which has seen a 30% increase in uptake. And the nutritional standards have changed the product range that we're buying. So those three things have had a massive change in what our food spend would be. So again, I think looking at individual measures and trying to track something over a period of time can potentially miss some of the bigger decisions and the bigger impacts that we're seeing as well. So I think it is a wee bit more challenging to sort of balance out some of those outcomes from the direct measures that we're trying to achieve. But I think just recognising that any benchmarking or any consideration of your indicators, you really need to understand the context.
Thank you very much, panel. Thank you, Kavira.
Clearly some work to be done around thinking how to broaden out what we're measuring there. And I thought that was illuminating, actually, Phil. I hadn't thought about that. 25 years, of course, to see an actual impact on what we're doing here. I'm now going to bring in Evelyn Tweed around the Food Commission.
Thanks, Convener, and good morning, panel, and thanks for all your answers so far. That's been really helpful. My question is about the Scottish Food Commission, and obviously they've taken on new powers just recently in June. What do you expect to get from the Scottish Food Commission with their new powers in regards to local authorities, community growing, local plans and procurement? And if I can maybe come to you, Andrew, first.
I think as most of the responses to the questions is trying to find that best practice and trying to find that opportunities for collaboration across different sectors, across different organisations. I think would be the hope from my point of view that they are I suppose a coordinating opportunity for that. Would be I suppose my main hope and ask that would be the kind of area where people genuinely recognise there is a balanced best practice that they're able to kind of present.
From a Food Commissioner's perspective, I would hope that they would be able to guide us and a bit like an HNI inspector within a school, that they're there for answers and support, but also to keep us following the sort of core principles of the Act and making sure that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. So it's that sort of double-edged sword, that it's keeping us right, but at the same time guiding us in the right way.
Laura?
So I think from a procurement perspective, we would hope that the Food Commission will work with us and ensure that some of the best practice that's already happening is recognised and carried forward, and also any new practices that they're introducing are realistic and can actually be carried out under the regulations, and that work with the environments that our local authorities are working in.
Great, thanks very much for that. I have got one brief question on, because I was thinking in my head, okay, we'll go till 10 past, so I've got a few minutes, even though we're over. And it's back to procurement, and Hugh, I think I'm going to come to you on this. So in our papers, it was kind of flagged up to us that the UK Internal Markets Act and agreements under the WTO could be a problem around, or a block for local food resilience. But it seems to me that that doesn't seem to be a problem. I mean, East Ayrshire is doing a lot of work on local procurement. So should we be concerned about UKIMA and those global agreements?
If I may, I don't think that we should be concerned enough that we would perceive it to be a blocker at this stage. I think that we need to remind ourselves about the good practice that we've developed here in Scotland over the course of the last 10 years. I think we naturally need to keep one eye on that. I think that may become more of an issue potentially in some other areas. And we, where it's appropriate to do so, we do partner with colleagues from the UK Government and Crown Commercial Services, and that's particularly effective in areas such as vehicles and with technology contracts as well. But with regard to how this might impact the work that we're doing here, particularly in food procurement, I don't see that as a short to medium term blocker, and I think that we continue to build on what we've got and what we have done. I think that we will be able to mitigate any long term risks that come from that as well. So I don't think, for the purposes of this discussion, we should be too concerned about it at this stage.
Thanks very much. So that concludes our questions. Many thanks for joining us this morning. I can see that we could have done with a bit more time. We could have gotten into some of the more detail, but I think that's been very, very helpful to get a sense. And I'm really glad that the Local Government Committee has taken on looking at the Good Food Nation plan this morning, and we've got a session next week with the Cabinet Secretary, because this is going to affect local government. And so it's great to have heard from you all this morning. So now I'm going to briefly suspend the session to allow for a changeover of witnesses. Thank you. Our second panel this morning, we are joined by Anna Kovarov, who's the Deputy Director at Norwich Scotland, and Emile Combet, who is a Commissioner at the new Scottish Food Commission. And we're also joined online by Jane Beasley, who's the Director of Circular Economy Delivery at Zero Waste Scotland. So I warmly welcome our witnesses to this panel. We've got around 60 minutes for discussion, and just to let you know, you don't need to operate the microphones. And Jane, if you want to indicate online, if you want to come in, then I'll know to bring you in. So I'll start with a couple of questions around plans, or kind of working together and collaboration. So maybe I'll direct this question initially. And again, because we're a bit pressed for time, don't feel you have to kind of answer the question unless you've got an additional point to add to what I call the public record or discourse. So the Highland Good Food Partnership states that the plan does not propose any new actions and targets, and neither does it commit to new indicators or areas of policy development. And I'd be interested to understand from Norwich's perspective initially, would you agree with this assessment?
Yes, we would agree. It's a very comprehensive summary or audit of existing policies that in different ways relate to the food system, but it doesn't propose anything new.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else agree with that? Different perspective. Emile?
Emily, sorry.
Yep.
I think from our perspective, we recognize that it's a very comprehensive audit and a vision of the future, which is really commendable. And our position is that time is not in our favour and that it's important to get started. So we really welcome this important moment, which is going to get the ball rolling.
Thanks. And Jane? Waiting for the microphone.
Yeah, I think in the kind of need for speed in this space and not chasing perfection in a very complex area, we need to get moving, we need to get the local plans up, and we need to, as much as we can, to then review, reflect as we go, as we get more data and information and more insight and knowledge, so we can build rather than always. We will always be in a position where, coming from different sectors, coming from different priorities, we will be looking for more, we will be looking for additional. But I think in something as complicated as food and food systems, we need to get off the ground, and then we need to reflect as to which indicators are working, which indicators are held up, and where we can do better.
Okay, great, thanks. And my next question is for Norwich Scotland, and it's around some of the points you made in the call for views around things being confusing and appearing contradictory. So Norwich Scotland noted that legislation states that the national plan must serve as a guide for local authorities and health boards, but it is for those bodies themselves to determine the outcomes of the plans. And I'd be interested to understand why that you conclude in your points that this approach is confusing and appears contradictory.
We think it would be helpful if all of the bodies that are preparing plans, so that's the Scottish Government, local authorities and health boards, were working towards a coherent set of outcomes so that we're not pushing and pulling in different directions when it comes to food policy. We also think that a set of, at least some level, a coherent set of indicators that could be used across local authorities and also with the Scottish Government would also be helpful. Again, so we were avoiding plans potentially working against one another. There needs to be much more coordination and coherence in that space and much more collaboration, I think, with local authorities, which hasn't happened so far. I think the process thus far has been the Scottish Government developing the plan and then a kind of presumption that local authorities need to have regard to the plan, but then also, offering that flexibility, which I think just in its wording is confusing. A better approach would have been a closer collaboration from the start, learning from some of the local authorities in Glasgow and Fife that have already done food plans, and making it a much more collaborative effort based on more dialogue than we've seen to date.
But we are here now. So this is what we've got to work with. I'm going to bring in Alexander Stewart with a couple of questions.
Thank you. Can I ask the the Scottish Food Commission will work with local authorities, and how will they ensure that Good Food Nation plans have regard to the national plan with the role of assessing the effectiveness of the plans? So how effective is it going to be when we have that in place? I don't know who wants to ask me, Professor.
Thank you. I think that's a really good plan, and this having regards function is potentially something that has created some uncertainties for local authorities because it's not really well defined on how close or how far one plans can be. In terms of the scrutiny process that the Scottish Food Commission is going to support relevant authority with, and the evaluation of the effectiveness of those plans, it's going to be very much based on the areas that the local plans are going to decide to target and focus on. Now, we see our role as a critical friend, really supporting and enabling this best practice exchange between relevant authorities and encouraging cooperation. Anna mentions that certain areas have got food plans already, and this is very much showcasing that very good practice that exists to make sure that some of the local authorities who are maybe further behind do benefit from what's already in place.
You're okay, thank you. And my second question is for Zero Waste Scotland. Are they satisfied that food waste and associated indicators are included in the plan? Because without that, would you like to see, and what would you like to see included in local good food plans?
Thank you. So the indicator question is an interesting one. It's a question that we sort of wrangle with anyway on a regular basis. We're currently undertaking the development of an intervention plan for household waste reduction. We're guiding Scottish Government on that, and the timescales of that run to March 27. So it's running alongside what's going to be required in the local plans. I think for us, any interventions that are put through, of course, our focus and our remit is about waste reduction, and it's about prevention of food waste within that space for all of the economic and environmental reasons that bring with it. But it's a challenging space. It's slightly easier in the household area where we do have compositional data. We do have things like kitchen diaries, sewer diaries. We can bring in other sources of information to kind of support that. And we do have a suite of research that's due to be published on the 29th of September, including some fresh data within that space. The more challenging area is the public sector data. And we have noted the fact that there are uncertainties within what's classified as the other group within there, and more work is definitely needed if we're going to be baselining from any data that we've got. And we talk regularly with CEPA, we talk regularly with the Scottish Government about how we can overcome this, because it's a multi-agency task. It's a very expensive, very challenging area to try and capture up-to-date information and data. Having said all of that, we do need indicators because we need to monitor progress. We need to say where we're at. So the kind of positive slant I'd like to put on this is there is definitely work in progress from our side of the fence. We are looking at a data strategy that sits alongside primarily looking at the household proportion, which obviously is a significant proportion of the food loss. And we'll be running that exercise as we go through, and plans will come into place. So it may be that future iterations will have a much more concrete foundation to build those interventions on, because we've got more surety in that data. What we've learned from experience, and we would kind of advise against, is not using poor or limited data, because from the offset you're challenged. You have to make sure that everything's proportionate, and also make sure that data's not being captured elsewhere, and make sure it's doing the right thing for you. So there could be other avenues. We don't know what that intervention plan is going to look like at the moment. It's very live. It's something we're undertaking. We will be piggybacking on lots of engagement, because all the stakeholders that are involved within developing the local plans are the stakeholders that we need to tie into. So we need to be really mindful of what's going on in that work, that we don't duplicate, we actually enhance. We maybe take on some of the burden through that route, but then that will have its own delivery plan that kind of sits behind it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm now going to, we're going to move to capacity and funding, and I'm going to bring in Megan Gallagher.
Thank you, Convener. Scotland Excel has argued that there needs to be investment in capacity and innovation, particularly when we're looking at market development, supplier engagement and training for public sector buyers. So how do these aspirations of the plan sit with local authorities right now who are struggling financially and are being forced to make savings over various different sectors within their own remit. And if I could start with Professor Combe, please.
Thank you. I think reading the papers and discussing with stakeholders, we do recognise this as a big constraint on resources. Might they be financial, but also time and reskilling and development of skills and capacity within the teams. And we see the position of the Scottish Food Commission in hearing those concerns and potentially advocating for resource to be fairly allocated and discussing with all parties how we can leverage or kind of fairly broad and common resources in commissioning some work out and working with each other. So really thinking creatively about what we can do to deliver the ambitions of the plan in a fairly constrained timeline, because time is not on our side. So really thinking creatively, and I think that's really where we can add value in thinking, well, how can we make this happen, recognizing that this work cannot be funded out of goodwill only.
Thank you.
If I can add to that, I think the financial memorandum as it stands outlines resourcing for writing the plans in the first place, reviewing them, rewriting them in 5 years' time, and the sort of associated consultation that needs to happen. But there isn't clarity on resourcing for implementation, and which is, I think, what you're alluding to. What the civil society organisations have been advocating for a long time is reallocation of some of the agricultural budget, a small percentage of that budget, towards local authorities to enable more local procurement and strengthening of sort of Good Food Nation agenda at the local level. So that is something where, in addition to kind of thinking creatively about resourcing, some reallocation of the budgets and reinvestment in that way would be beneficial.
Thank you. And Jane, I don't know if you've got anything to add from your end. Thank you.
Yes, I was just going to type if I could just quickly jump in. So from a resourcing point of view, I think our role very much, although it's only one element of the plan, you know, it is the element that's focused on food waste reduction, food waste prevention. However, the behavioural change insights that we're sort of gathering across running pilots and trials means we're in a position to be able to pull together best practice. We can pull together those the cases that we can share with local government to say, if you take this approach, this is what we expect to be the outcome. And that's where we kind of see our value. We've also done a lot of work supporting businesses. We have tools and toolkits that are accessible for businesses to review their waste practices. There is that economic slant within there as well as to the benefits of taking those approaches and the savings that are associated with it. So we're trying to sort of fill that gap, increase the pace and the scale of change by sharing the knowledge and insights that we have. We've got a couple of pilots which are about to launch. We have behavioural change insights, which we know as to why the kind of responses has been. Food waste is a very moral issue. It's not necessarily linked to environmental factors. So it changes how you address something like that. We know we can look at pointing to local authorities so they can make savings, cost savings on their waste management from better food management, food waste reductions, increasing food recycling. So all the time we're amassing that evidence and insight, we're sharing it, we're pushing it out, and that's our main priority, so that we're doing the kind of legwork and getting those insights and helping authorities make those decisions.
And if I may just have a supplementary on the point that you've raised there, Jane. So when we're talking about food recycling, a number of councils have had to introduce, for example, charges for recycling of bins. Do you think that's an incentive and a best way to try and, you know, encourage people to recycle properly, but also the cost that's incurred on councils as well for actually having to undertake that task and management of that task that's therefore being passed on to individual homeowners and renters?
So what we have found in one piece of research that we did last year, we did an options appraisal that was looking specifically at the organics component, and the model that came through in terms of getting the best performance was a separate food collection, a charge for garden waste collection. It was the route through that a local authority could be the most effective and run a service. There's always a balance in terms of optimising that service, and local authorities having to make decisions about where they can impose a charge and why they should impose a charge. If you're looking at behaviour change, those things have to be managed very, very well for you to get that behaviour change that you're looking for. So often the cost and the charge aspect isn't going to generate that for you, but it's what sits behind it and what sits alongside it. to make it the most effective route through.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Convener.
Thanks. I'm now going to bring in Evelyn Tweed.
Thanks, Convener, and good morning, panel. It's still the morning, isn't it? Good morning, panel. Thanks for your answers so far. South Lanarkshire Council has raised concerns about the timescales in relation to having local plans completed and approved by late 2027. And we also know there are going to be local council elections in 2027 as well. What are the panel's thoughts on these concerns? How do you think this is going to go? Can I ask Emily first?
Thank you. Not wanting to make assumptions on where those concerns come from, I would think that depending on the capacity on the ground to deliver the plan, especially if the local authorities are starting from ground zero or very, very early, they are potentially very valid concerns, especially if there's not the staff, the resources in place, or the actual collaboration with neighbouring authorities. We've heard that some local authorities are very fortunate to have very strong relationship with their neighbours and health board. It's not necessarily the case for all local authorities. So it's a very heterogeneous landscape. So to some extent, the Scottish Food Commission at the moment is mapping those key stakeholders and trying to understand kind of needs level and understand where people are starting from to really best advise and guide. But yeah, you're describing a complex landscape where there is an election going on. There are a lot of other priorities, and this might make it quite challenging for some relevant authorities.
Okay. Would anyone else like to come in? No?
If I can add to that, I think there's been some uncertainty about resourcing, which meant that some of the local authorities were not or did not feel able to kind of even begin thinking about this new area of work, given all of the other pressures that they're facing. Having said that, I think I will echo Emily's earlier point around needing to kind of get on with it and make some progress, even if the plans are imperfect. We need to start making some progress. And the Good Food Nation Living Lab, based at the University of Edinburgh, is ready and eager to support local authorities with development of the plans.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. I'm now going to bring in Willie Coffey with around planning and licensing.
Thanks again, Convener. Good morning to everyone. I wonder if I could ask the same questions asked the previous panel. One is on planning and licensing powers, and whether we need to improve those to take this whole agenda forward. We heard the story, I think it was from Phil, who was saying there's a plethora of applications from in and around schools for food outlets and fast food and so on and so forth. Do you think, in your experience, we need to do a little bit more to either discourage that or to make the offer much better, say, within schools in particular, to avoid this particular problem?
Yeah, I can start. I think, yes, definitely around schools, some licensing and better planning and a clearer guidance, I think, through the National Planning Framework would be helpful. We also need to look at the concentration of out-of-home provision in different parts of our cities across this kind of areas of multiple deprivation. We know that more affluent parts of the city tend to have healthier options. The less affluent parts of the city tend to have more takeaways and more unhealthy options. So that's another area to look at. And I think when it also comes to planning, what is really important is when planning decisions are challenged, when a local authority refuses, for instance, a permission for a new fast food outlet and that decision is challenged, that they have some backing from the Scottish Government to pursue and see through legal actions that often follow, because at the moment local authorities don't have the resources to fight lengthy legal battles, which often mean that they acquiesce in the face of quite relentless corporate influence. So that kind of, again, joined up and partnership working across those two levels is really important too.
Thanks, Anna. Emily, Jane, any views on this?
I think it's a really important point, and it talks very much to the public health critical point in the agenda in improving the health of the nation in a fairly short time, and focusing on planning, especially around food, is going to be really important. And I think the local plan, that's the beauty of the local plan, is they can respond to the real priorities that are within the kind of areas, and the Scottish Food Commission is really keen to support those local authorities who see that as a key target that they want to include in their plans to really support ambitious plans related to, for example, here, planning.
Okay, thank you, Emily. Jane, any view on that planning and licensing issue?
Just to say, in terms of planning, obviously we're always mindful then of the kind of consequences, particularly with the example that you gave with increased fast food outlets and so on. You are going to get increased packaging waste, you're going to get increased food waste. So, you know, again, that's sort of counter to where we're trying to come from here. And then there's the wider issue with planning, which goes a little bit beyond Good Food Nation, but actually if work is successful in terms of food waste reduction and then optimising, say, food recycling services, whether that's from business or at homes, then there is that infrastructure piece and making sure that Scotland is kind of fully equipped to manage that material, and we are having much more kind of circular solutions, so that material's going back, digest dates and so on. So we have a kind of wider view on planning, but always mindful with that, with the resource position.
Thank you for that. My other question was on the collaboration between the councils and the health boards on taking forward the principles of Good Food Nation. Can you see some examples of that in practice, perhaps, or can you suggest ways that we could improve that relationship and, again, to take the Good Food Nation principles forward? Anna?
Yes, I think we're seeing some early examples of collaboration across Glasgow and across the Tayside region as well. It's particularly where the areas of the health board don't map exactly onto the areas of local authority. There's been some kind of early thinking about how to manage that. I think Scottish Government or COSLA potentially have a really important convening role in terms of bringing more collaboration in that space. Good Food Nation Living Lab is another part of it, but it's only a project that, you know, has a kind of end date. But we need longer-term structural mechanisms for ongoing cooperation and collaboration there.
Emily?
I think it's a really good opportunity to think about not only those collaborations which are fairly natural, of people who know each other and work together, but think a little bit broader between local authorities and health board. And the Commission has a role here in brokering those maybe a little bit less natural kind of discussions between people who may not work together routinely, but really identifying how we can accelerate the pace of designing and implementing the plans by getting the right people together in the same space so that they can really exchange this best practice and really think creatively again on what can be done. So moving away from maybe what we're already doing towards something which is really creative, innovative and transformative.
Thank you, Emily. Jane?
Yes, I mean, partnerships are key to everything. I think for us, it's making sure that we are introducing things to the partnerships that perhaps they haven't considered before. So a lot of our research on behaviour change within the food space, it's showing the importance of portioning, meal planning, which has a direct impact then on the health side of things as well as what we're kind of dealing with. The latest data has shown over 3/4 of what's thrown out in food waste is edible, and a significant portion of that is fresh fruit and vegetables, which we know that there's a dietary challenge for people getting that within the diet. So there is an issue with planning. It's not used quickly. So we need to go into these partnerships and look at how do we share our insight, how do we share our evidence to try and tackle the behaviours. And it really is a joined up approach in terms of what the local authorities are wanting from it, what the health sector is wanting from it. And that kind of insight is probably not somewhere where perhaps people would have thought, oh, Zero Waste Scotland has something to offer in that place. So we're really driving through the intelligence that we're gathering and tapping into those partnerships and just optimising them because, like I say, it's definitely a collaborative effort.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you. And I'm now going to bring in Mark Griffin.
Thanks, Convener. The committee has had a really close interest in community food growing that stems from previous inquiry and work around the Community Empowerment Bill and allotments. And what we'd found was that one of the biggest barriers to community food growing was access to land to grow that food. And so can I ask Emily, what do you think, if anything, is in the proposed Good Food Nation plan that overcomes those barriers for communities or organisations to get access to land to grow food?
So as a commission, we chose not to explore too much the specific point of the Good Food Nation plan, so I may be veering a little bit from our written response and speak more from a professional kind of general experience here. I think in certain local authorities, this is potentially going to be a big challenge depending on the space that is available. Yet I think the general framework makes strong notice to points that are relevant to the Community Empowerment Act, which I think is where there is a real scope to enrich how we do things and give more power to the people to ask for what technically they deserve and are entitled to ask, but may not know yet that they can, if it makes sense. So from the Scottish Food Commission perspective, we see members of the public very much as one of the stakeholder group. They don't need to be represented by an organisation. They, as individuals, are stakeholders. And we hope that the work we're going to do is going to enable those specific individual stakeholders in recognising that the Act is for them, the plans are for them, and then enable them to kind of ask for what they deserve, basically.
Okay, thank you. Anna or Jane, any comments on access to land?
I can comment briefly, and I suppose to give credit to the plan for attempting to measure the amount of space that is used for community growing, and that will obviously look very different in different local authorities. So urban local authorities will grapple with different challenges there than rural local authorities. I agree with Emily that kind of better awareness of the Community Empowerment Act and the use of the ability to kind of claim land that isn't otherwise used is important. I think also there is a little bit of kind of culture change that is needed. You know, I'm aware of one community group who have been trying for the last 3 years to reclaim some land from the NHS with great difficulty because the land is currently being farmed very neatly in very conventional ways. And so the health board is a bit reluctant to kind of have messy community groups coming and, you know, kind of having a go with orchards and more of the kind of cultural activity when they're, you know, at the moment, it just having a farmer farm it commercially gives them peace of mind. So there needs to be, I think, a little bit more of recognition of and importance given to culturally to communities growing their own food, and also progression towards horticulture as a more commercial basis for, you know, people making a living out of farming, not simply as a hobbyist activity.
Thanks very much. Oh, Jane, come on in.
Just pretty quickly today. The land issue is definitely outside of our kind of area of expertise. However, you know, we do support the principle of providing that community access to community growth areas. Growing our own food, we know, does support that kind of awareness raising of the value of food, and also recognising skills development in that space and sort of more resilience. But the only caveat to that is we would need to ensure that if we were kind of pushing this out and we're having novices in this space, which is, I guess, what everyone's hoping for, then we need to be really mindful that everything that's grown does not then become a food waste issue because people are not sure how to plan, how to use, how to store, and so on. So we would be looking for some kind of skills support in that space if this really does take off.
Okay, thanks for that. I've got a few follow-up questions. One of them is that there was, and maybe you are not the people to ask this question of, given this is more about the local food plans and the community growing spaces, but the Community Empowerment Act created the requirement for local authorities to create these local food plans. And I just wonder if we have a sense of, have they been wrapped up into the Good Food Nation plans, or what's happened with them? Anybody got awareness of that?
Growing strategies.
Yes, I think so, yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think anecdotally, I'm aware of some local authorities kind of waiting to try and do both of them at the same time in a joined up way, but it's only anecdotal.
Okay, well, that would make sense because we are very aware of the, to coin a phrase that actually Greg Little, our researcher, coined, planscape. So the local authorities have a lot of plans in the planscape. So that would make sense to try to combine those. The market garden, so in our call for views, there was a lot of responses that brought up the issue of market gardens and that sector. And I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on how they could contribute more. Certainly in the Rural Affairs Committee, I was doing a lot of work on supporting market gardens being supported to actually contribute more to the local food production and therefore kind of being brought into the system more here. And I'll just add also that I think there's an incredible opportunity to see local, so this is now also pulling in the community wealth building bill that's coming through Parliament, that local authorities could be an incredible anchor organisation for our food system, given that they spend £83 million a year. And as we heard earlier, over a third of Scottish of the food source are Scottish products. So I just wonder. So there's a couple of pieces there. One around local authorities being able to move into that place of being anchor organisations in terms of community wealth building, and then therefore being able to support producers like market gardeners. Or however you feel like you want to pick that question up. Anne, I saw you nodding a lot when I was bringing that up.
You could see my mind kind of going through different parts of it. And I think, so maybe to start with the market gardens as a topic, not, I think, sufficiently recognised in the Good Food Nation Plan as it stands, and not sufficiently supported through the farm subsidy regime at the moment. So, and this is due to a combination of factors that are possibly more relevant to the RAI Committee, but there definitely needs to be a more concerted effort to support smaller scale production, which is often highly productive in terms of the kind of food that we want to be eating more of, but not sufficiently supported through subsidy system because it uses relatively little land. So there's a challenge to be resolved there. And I think in general point, when we think about our dietary goals and what kind of food we need to be eating more of, that is exactly the type of agriculture that deserves more support, and that can thrive both in rural settings but actually also in urban and peri-urban settings, bringing people closer to the sources of food, building a better food culture. I think all of that is a really important part of it. And then, as you say, kind of local authorities' role within that in terms of facilitating that through planning, supporting kind of more coordination in that space also, and more skills exchange with community growing sector. There is obvious overlaps there, and people seeing a path from hobbyist growing and the kind of excitement around food. It's often a massive leap to think I'm going to become a farmer, but for many people that transition to I'm going to become a market garden, I'm going to have a real go at this in a more semi-commercial or commercial basis is important. And then from the Scottish Government's point of view, I think more support for developing vocational training in that place and supporting existing providers to develop vocational training there, also really important. So yes, lots of thoughts. I think definitely a sector to be more strongly developed if we think about Scotland as a good food nation and the ambition that we want to achieve there.
And then therefore, if we have more market gardeners, then local authorities could potentially be sourcing from them, and that becomes that anchor organisation where it's supporting the network of small producers around within the county.
Absolutely, but I think there you run into issues of dynamic procurement, which maybe you've covered in the previous session, and the importance of resourcing local authorities to have procurement officers who support people to be tender ready and to do those early pilots, so that by the time you come to kind of tendering it out, those producers are ready and able to tender and commercially kind of win some of those contracts. So yeah, quite a complex area, but yes, absolutely.
Thanks. Anybody else want to come in on this?
I think mostly to the point of bringing the produce of the market gardens to the consumers, making sure that there is opportunities for local markets and that this type of selling of food is really emphasized. And I think some city food plans have started to think, well, how can we do that? How can we make sure that residents do see what is being produced by those market gardens in the local market on their local streets or in their areas? And it's really thinking, well, what's going on at the moment, and if someone is not necessarily ready to enter the procurement complexities, and we've heard that it's not simple, there is another avenue where they know that their produce can be displayed on a regular slot for people to go and buy, enjoy, and recognize that there is a skill in the area of people producing that food here in specific parts of Scotland.
Thanks. Jane, have you got a perspective on the food waste, a part of the market gardens or anything in there?
Just really to say that the more we can have a connection with food, then the better in terms of our relationship. And then the consequences in terms of what we see as value and what ultimately then we would kind of see as wastage. So anything's positive, that's actually bringing that visibility and bringing that local connection. It just helps us build that awareness, and it helps us tap into deep belief systems, and it taps into all sorts of different areas where we can get that behaviour change. So it's definitely a positive aspect.
Thanks. And then I've got one final question here around what you think the expectations of. So we've got these wonderful forums and action points called community planning partnerships, and I just wonder what your thoughts are, if you've given any thought to what we would be expecting of them in terms of thinking around how they deploy their activities in that space for the Good Food Nation. Is there an opportunity there? I see that maybe there's not been thinking about using that as a venue.
Mentioned in the sort of work we have been doing, but it is to say that clearly the more collaboration in that space the better, because you need much better join up than we have at the moment. So yes, I could completely see them as being a natural partner in that work on the local level.
Okay, great.
And I think it goes back to this brokering those maybe non-natural interactions that are maybe not existing at present, but really introducing key actors like community planning partnership to teams and local authorities and health board, and flagging the potential potentiation of the interactions.
Okay, thanks. Okay, I think that brings us to the end of our questions. I think it's been very helpful to hear from you, so thank you very much for your contributions this morning. And we have previously agreed to take the next item in private, so as that was the last public item on our agenda today, I now close the public part of the meeting. Thank you.